If you're going to be moving soon and have no idea where to start, or you have had bad experiences in the past where it ended up being really stressful or expensive, then this video is for you, because we're not only going to be going into the standard tips and hacks that you always see, but we'll also be talking about how exactly to plan and schedule your move so that nothing falls through the cracks and you're not left scrambling last minute. And this is going to be especially helpful for those of you who are doing an out-of-state move or even moving across state lines, like I will be for the 4th time in 3 years in exactly 1 week from now. Now, if you've never planned a major move like this before, you might even be confused on where do you even start. There's going to be a few decisions you have to make first before you can really do any sort of planning or preparing. And the first and most critical part is going to be deciding how exactly to move your stuff. Now, there are 2 really common ways to do this. The first is one, if you have moved before in your 20s, you're probably used to, which is the self-move. And that can be done in a couple different ways. You can either rent a U-Haul if you're really tight on money and drive everything yourself, but I do not recommend this. I've done this in the past and I've always regretted it. It's very stressful. Or you can choose to do a pod service where they deliver the container to your front doorstep, you move everything in yourself, they take it, drop it off at your new place, and you take everything out from there. And this can be a good option if you are choosing to fly, or if you want to drive but just be more comfortable and not have to deal with like a huge trailer hitch behind you. The second really common option, and the one I will always recommend if you can afford it, is to hire movers. And there's varying levels of service for this. The first and most basic one is to just have someone come and take all of the boxes and the furniture you've already prepared, put it into their truck, drive it to the new place, and unload it into your new home. And the second option, which I will probably be doing for the rest of my life as soon as I can afford it, is to do a full white glove service, which means that they come in, pack for you. So they actually take everything in your apartment, put it into boxes, organize it. You don't lift a single finger, and then they unpack it for you in your new place. Everything's already laid out when you get there. Again, if you can afford it, I think that is absolutely worth every penny, because moving itself is already stressful enough, and not having to deal with all of your crap and finding time to put it away and like where is it gonna go, just that is one of the few things in life that you should be spending money on if you can. And especially if you live in a big city, for example, I live in New York, I would highly suggest that you pick one of these movers options, because a lot of the times the hardest part about self-moving is finding parking, figuring out how long you can block the street for, and if you hire people to do this for you, that's completely off your mind. You don't have to worry about it. Now, the third less common option, but it's still viable depending on your situation, especially if you don't have a lot of furniture or larger possessions, is to pack up everything and ship it. You can check out whatever rates are available at your UPS, FedEx, USPS, see how much that's gonna cost. And then from there, decide if it makes sense to mail everything or to just get a mover to do it for you. Now, once you've decided how you're gonna move your stuff, you're also gonna have to figure out how to move yourself. Now, depending on how far you're gonna go, you can choose to either fly and bring all of your personal belongings with you and just have the movers meet you wherever you're going, or you can drive, which means you have the option of bringing your belongings along with you in the car, meeting the movers there, taking a U-Haul. There's plenty of ways to do this. There's also the option of doing a road trip. If you're going cross country, you can probably manage to do this in maybe 3 or 4 days if you really hate yourself. Otherwise, it's gonna take a minimum of probably 2 to 3 weeks if you want to have some semblance of enjoyment along the way. So keep that in mind. It is something that Albie and I considered when we were planning this move back from New York to California, but knowing that it was gonna take us a few weeks or even a month to plan a full vacation on top of having to deal with all of the stress of moving and our stuff getting back okay, and it felt like too much for this phase of our life. But if you have the time, you can take the time off, then that is something you can consider doing. Now, the third decision is going to be to decide when you're moving. And if you haven't moved before, this might sound simpler than it actually is. You probably just want to look at a calendar and say, hey, this day would work for me. But it doesn't always work that way, especially if you're in a rental building or a condo. They're going to have a lot of rules around when you're allowed to move out. So for example, in my first apartment, when I moved to the city, I did not realize that most condos only let you move Monday through Friday during working hours. Because of that, I ended up having to forfeit all my furniture. So I would definitely suggest that you figure out whatever rules apply to wherever you're living, work around that, and then also talk to your landlord, because there might be certain days that you can or can't move out. It might have to be the 1st of the month, the 15th of the month, the end of the month. And then you're also gonna have to think about how are these days overlapping with the new place you're going, because a lot of the times you can move out at the end of the month so that your apartment is gonna be available for the next person on the 1st, but your next apartment might not be available on that last day. So you might have a gap where you need to stay with friends, figure out where you're gonna put your stuff. Is it gonna go into storage, stay in a pod or a U-Haul? If you can afford it or timing allows, I would definitely suggest finding some sort of overlap between your first place and your next. A week is really good if you can make that happen. It's definitely gonna make the whole moving process easier, and you're gonna have to do a lot less juggling and sleeping on the floor and rushing, and just, if you can make it work, trust me, it's worth it. Then the fourth and final thing that you want to consider is what you're going to move. Now, no matter what you choose to bring with you or what you choose not to, definitely take this as an opportunity to declutter and sell things off that you might not need anymore. But in general, there tends to be a pretty big debate between whether or not it makes sense to sell most of your stuff and rebuy everything on the other side, or if you should just move everything that you already have. And of course, when you make this decision, you can go and calculate how much your stuff costs, figure out how much it's gonna cost to move it versus how much people would likely buy it for. But all of that aside, I think there's a lot of emotional costs and effort and energy involved in selling and rebuying that isn't really talked about. And I've tried to do this in the past, but I've always found that it wasn't really worth it. And I just kind of wished I would have gone with moving everything at the end of the day, because a lot of the times people make it sound like selling and buying furniture is this really simple thing. But unless you have a car or you live in the suburbs and it's really easy for you to transport things, it's not as simple as it sounds, okay? Especially living in a city. When you buy something used online, it doesn't just magically appear in your apartment, and most people are not willing to do drop-offs because they also don't have transportation to get to you, which means you are gonna have to factor in the cost of an Uber or hiring a TaskRabbit. You're gonna have to bother your friend and then coordinate schedules, and there's coordinating schedules with the person that you're buying from. You have to deal with flakers and negotiating, and you also have to take time out of your day to go get it. It can be a lot. Sometimes it's really not worth it to try and save a couple extra dollars. I think replacing just one or two items that you don't want to bring with you makes sense, but if you have to go through this process with every single major piece of furniture that you have in your place, and of course you're gonna be completely empty with nothing for months while you do this, it might not be worth it. And even if you were to decide to buy all new from, Amazon, Wayfair, get things pretty cheap, there's still all of the mental energy that goes into researching and purchasing, waiting for delivery, unpacking it, installing and building, figuring out where it's gonna go, and then getting rid of all the packing materials. And on top of that, you're in a new place trying to juggle all this other stuff around moving and getting settled in. And one other thing, sorry, I know I'm like ranting at this point, but little things do add up, okay? When I first came here, I only had 4 suitcases with me and didn't want to pay extra for checking more luggage. I figured I could just bring all of my clothes and sentimental items and then replace all of the utensils and spices and toiletries and just, little minutia of everyday life when I got here. But I think it's really easy to underappreciate just how many tiny little things you use throughout your day until you have to go and buy all of them all over again. I think I ended up spending probably almost $1,000, maybe even more, just buying all these random bowls and knickknacks for my new apartment when I could have just saved myself the hassle, the time, and the money by spending an extra $100 for another checked luggage. Now that being said, I know there's a lot of you who are still gonna wanna sell all your stuff. That's totally fine. There's plenty of circumstances where it still makes sense. And if that is the case, I'll have more tips about that later on in the video. Once you've made all these decisions, it's time to actually plan the move. And for this part, I highly, highly, highly suggest that you set a calendar and a list of to-dos and actually map out everything, like fully project plan this, because it's gonna take away so much stress and you're gonna know exactly when things need to be done. A list of the critical dates you're gonna wanna figure out and track is number 1, letting your landlord know when you're moving. Pretty important. So when is the inspection? When do you hope to get your security deposit back? You're also gonna wanna make some time to give tours and walkthroughs to potential tenants. Next, if you hired movers, you're gonna wanna consider when you wanna hire the movers by, what date they're coming, what date they're also delivering your stuff. Next, you also wanna consider cleaning. So when are you gonna clean the apartment? When are you gonna book a cleaner, or if you're even getting one in the first place? When they're gonna be coming, and also when are you gonna be patching up holes and fixing things around the apartment before your landlord's final walkthrough, if they're gonna do one. Also list your dates for when you plan to sell stuff. So when you wanna list the items, the last day you wanna sell them before either lowering the price or just giving them away entirely. And then you also want to think about when you're going to start packing. So when are you going to start looking for supplies? Are you going to be buying them, ordering them in advance? Are you looking at buy nothing groups, borrowing from people in the neighborhood? Because if you are going to do that and collect boxes that are given away for free, you probably want to start that process pretty early. Also take note of when you want to start packing and when you want to finish. Next is booking transportation. So whether you are flying or you're driving, car rentals, U-Hauls, you want to make sure that you are booking those tickets or those services ahead of time. Also, one thing I did this time around that I don't see mentioned a lot is creating a bucket list and things that you just want to do locally before you leave. Also making a list of friends you want to see, and then making sure that you can schedule out those activities or seeing those people around all of the rest of the moving chaos that's happening. And finally, you want to think about your last week's schedule. So what items do you need until the very last day? When are you going to get rid of those? What are you going to do with them? And then when is the last day that you plan on clearing out your fridge or your bathroom, just kind of the things that you use on a daily basis. And then there's also a couple tasks you want to make sure you're taking care of. They might not necessarily be on a certain timeline, but make sure they're on a list somewhere so you don't forget. The first is changing your address. So this can be with work, with your bank. If you shop on Amazon a lot or any other store, probably change that ahead of time so you don't accidentally send something to your old address in the future. You can also set up mail forwarding to make sure that if something doesn't get changed, you do get important documents mailed to your new address. And then you need to consider different forms of insurance. So if you have renter's insurance, homeowner's insurance, you're going to need to update that address, as well as if you have health insurance, it might change if you're moving states. And then there's also your utility changes. So make sure to turn off your utilities either the day you leave, the day after you leave, and also as a kind gesture, let your landlord know, because they might be doing work in the apartment after, or someone might be moving in and they need to know when the utilities are going to be shut off. And finally, you are going to want to check with your building if you are in a rental building or a condo to see what their policies are about moving, because a lot of the times you have to rent the elevator during a certain period, or you might have to pay a fee to move out. They might have you signed, I think it's a CO, kind of some document thing in order to get stuff out. I have had people in the past, not myself, but others, who did not think to sign this ahead of time and they couldn't move large pieces of furniture out. So make sure you talk to your building, your front desk, if you have one. Okay, I know this all sounds like a lot, so I suggest you put all of these tasks and all of these dates into some sort of calendar, notebook, wherever you keep track of things. The way I really like to do this is by using task management apps like Akiflow. They are sponsoring today's video, but if you've been following my channel for any period of time, you know that I am a huge fangirl. They have saved me so much stress over the last year, especially when it comes to navigating a huge change with a lot of moving pieces. So this is our last week of moving. I did plan out our entire month ahead of time. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you make this whole plan is to input any events or obligations you have that you know you're going to have to work around. And Akiflow makes this really easy because they do something called integrations. And you can see if I go up here that my Google Calendar, my Notion, and my Gmail are all connected. So everything is automatically imported into here. You can see that these red events blocked out here are directly from my Google Calendar. And then I also have emails from movers or just other tasks I need to do that import in here as well. And then I can figure out when to batch answer them. I also created a moving project. So you can see that all of these tasks here are tagged with moving, and that way I get to separate them from my work or different wedding tasks and other things I have to do. You can also tag them. For example, we have ones that I can only do when I'm at home, calls I need to make, emails I need to answer, things that are low energy, errands, and this way I can batch everything. I also suggest that you put in some sort of deadline for tasks. If there's a certain date that it needs to be done by, that's also a good reminder. And then once I had all of my routines blocked out, all my events blocked out, I actually went and created these time blocks here for anything related to moving, just to make sure that I had time that I was going to be spending in our last week or our last 2 weeks. And now I can actually go and drag these tasks into here. So if I want on this first packing day, let's say I want to pack the bedroom and kitchen, you can also drag tasks directly into here. So maybe I want to make sure I hire the cleaner by this time, and then I can check it off directly in the calendar, which is really nice. And if there's anything that you don't want to think about right now or have on this list, but you want to be reminded of it later, you can always go into here and snooze. So maybe I want to snooze it for tomorrow, next week. You can also choose a specific day that you want to be reminded of. And now we can see under this task list that a lot of these items are scheduled. And so I'm just going to leave them in my inbox, and then when I go and do my daily review or my weekly review, I can just see what items I still have left to do. Again, I think this is just so useful for trying to plan something with so many moving parts. I mean, you have so much going on in your life, and then you're also trying to actually move to another place. If you're interested in giving them a try, you can use the link in the description below. And thank you, Akiflow, for sponsoring this video. Now let's move on to some tips on how to save money. Because if you have moved before, you know that no matter what, this gets very expensive. If you're choosing to hire movers or you haven't even decided how you're gonna move yet, I would highly suggest taking a lot of quotes from a lot of different places. They're gonna be wildly different, and it's not always based on the level of service. Sometimes people just like to charge a lot because they can. So get as many quotes as you can from every local company. Most of the time, they're basing their rough quotes around the size of your apartment, and they judge that based off of rooms. So they might say a studio apartment, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, etc. And they usually itemize based off of how many boxes you have and other furniture pieces, but some will do an hourly rate or a flat rate. And when you are hiring the movers, make sure to ask questions like whether or not you're going to be renting out a full truck versus a certain amount of cubic feet on a shared truck, which is cheaper, but there might be like a minimum amount that you need to fill. You also want to start getting a rough quote a few weeks before and just itemize everything you have. You can usually finalize it up until a day or two before, but just make sure that you understand whether or not you're doing a binding or non-binding contract. If you're doing a binding contract, you're agreeing to a quote beforehand and finalizing it usually the day or two before or even day of. If you're doing a non-binding contract, that means that they can give you a rough quote and decide exactly how much everything costs to move when they get to your new location, and then hold yourself hostage until you pay whatever they decide that they want you to pay. I'll let you decide which one's better. Now, circling back to selling and rebuying, I know I said a lot of things earlier, but I mean, regardless of whether or not you're going to be selling your entire apartment, you probably will be selling at least a few things. And a few ways to do that are, number one, through your landlord or your new tenant. This is probably the easiest one if you can swing it because it doesn't require you to move furniture at all. We actually bought a few things from the previous tenant that was here, especially like the wall hooks and shoe racks and things that were kind of already installed. And we didn't really feel like finding something new and installing it ourselves. But if that's not an option, you can always do a blast to the rest of your building. If you're an apartment building, see if anyone who is like your neighbor wants to take something, because again, that's much easier to move within the building than across the city, across the town. And then if those two don't work out, you can also tap into your local network, your friends. Sometimes this is easier, especially when it comes to like your bed or things that you would rather have up until the last minute, because you can trust that they're gonna take it on the last day and not flake out. Then if you do wanna put out a blast to strangers, you can always use Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist. If you have clothes you want to get rid of, Depop and Poshmark are a really good option. And just some general tips I have around selling is, number one, most importantly, do not wait until the last week unless you want to be very stressed or sell everything for a fraction of the price that it's worth. Instead, I would sell early and phase your selling based off of how close you are to your move. Even if you think you can sell everything in the last week, it's usually not worth the hassle because you're gonna have to be coordinating so many people coming in and taking things and posting all these listings and figuring out all these messages, and it's just a lot to deal with at the same time. Plus, if someone flakes, then you have to figure out a replacement for them, so you want to avoid that as much as possible. In general, when it comes to pricing, I would usually price things maybe 10-20% higher than I really want to let it go for, because a lot of people are going to want to negotiate, and if they see that something is roughly within their price range, but they don't really like the price for it, they're probably gonna message you and ask you if you can do a little bit lower. Now, the schedule that I would go with is 1 month out, clear out all of your clothes that you wanna get rid of. That usually takes a long time to sell, and it's not gonna affect your day-to-day life when you get rid of it. You can also get rid of any decor like plants or mirrors, things that, again, aren't affecting you on a day-to-day basis, as well as any storage items like dressers. That kind of stuff, you can really just, take out whatever you have there, put it into a box, pre-pack a little bit, even throw it on the floor if you need to. And then 2 to 3 weeks before is when you want to start thinking about any high-use, expensive items. A couch is a really great example of this. It takes kind of a while to get someone to take it, and at the same time, you don't want to get rid of your couch like a month in advance. And on that note, I would actually suggest that anything that is large, soft, or upholstered and expensive, that you consider keeping it and moving it, because usually those items don't resell for a really good percentage compared to any like hard surfaced items, just because people get kind of like skeeved out by a mattress that's reused, or you have to worry about bed bugs, and then when you go to a new place, you're also gonna have to worry about these things, so it'll be harder for you to replace them, and you'll probably have to buy it new. So unless that's something that you really want to get new, probably keep those things if it's within your budget to move it. And then 1 week before, anything that's left over, price to sell, offer discounts for bundles if people are going to take more than one thing. You can even make like a closeout moving sale type of post on Facebook Marketplace. Usually someone will come and take a bunch of things because they're also moving in at that same time. This is also a great time that if you do want to get rid of your bed or your dining table, your desk, maybe like appliances, the kind of stuff that you really use day to day and will affect you if you don't have it in the last week, those are the things that you want to start prioritizing getting rid of once you're really approaching the move date. And then a few days before you're set to move, or even up until the day you're gonna move, if you really want to push it, you can do some sort of like little giveaway party and have all your friends come over and clear out the fridge for you, take any of your pantry items, any stuff that didn't sell, or cheap things, you know, like storage items, small mirrors, decors, I don't know, just whatever you have around your apartment. Plants are also a really great thing to give to friends because then you get to know that they're in a good place and you can come visit them if you want to. You can also do buy nothing groups, post your building chat, go to a donation center, just clear out everything else that you don't want to move and you haven't been able to sell. So that is everything I know about saving money. And last but not least, we're going to talk about how to save yourself from hair loss, aka stress. My biggest tip is to be kind and considerate to your future self by being thoughtful about how you pack. It's really tempting to think that you're gonna remember exactly where everything goes, what's in what box, but our memories are not that great, okay? So just trust me on this. Pretend that you're not gonna remember where anything is, and instead of labeling boxes like kitchen, living room, label it by the actual stuff that's in there. So for example, kitchen, you might say air fryer, utensils, bowls, spices. Because especially as you start wrapping up your move, you're probably gonna end up putting random items in different places, and usually things don't get unpacked within the first hour that you get to your new place, so you wanna make sure you know if you need to grab something right away, where exactly it is. Another thing that can be really, really useful is creating a spreadsheet. So instead of having to write out all these details on top of the box, one thing we did in our last move is to just write numbers and labels on them. So we had like A1, A2, and I would put on a spreadsheet exactly what the box was, what it looks like, what the label is, and have a bigger description of what's in there. This can also be really nice if you need to know where things are, but you don't have your boxes with you. Also make sure to create an open first box. So anything like your toiletries, your pajamas, the clothes you want to wear in the first few days, you can put that into a box that is labeled open first. And that way you're not digging through all of your stuff on the first night when you're tired and you just want to go to bed and all you need is your toothbrush. Also, if you're flying, I would really suggest that you put all of your valuables and things that you're worried about losing into your suitcases. So we have, you know, a lot of camera equipment and things that we probably don't want to trust movers with. I don't think stealing is really that common, but it does happen. So any, you know, heirlooms, jewelry, things that are really small and you can take with you, I would probably keep it on your person just for the peace of mind. My next tip is that if you can afford it and your boss will let you, definitely try and take a day off, even a week off if you can make it happen, just to give yourself a buffer so that you can pack, unpack. If anything goes wrong, you have time to deal with it. It's really not fun to have to do all this stuff in between meetings on the day that you're moving. And I know people don't really like to spend their PTO on things that aren't vacations, but I promise you, you're gonna thank yourself if you do it. And then in your very last few days, once you have packed up your fridge and all of your cooking utensils, get some ready-made meals to just microwave. You know, Factor is a really good option for this. You can also use services like Too Good To Go if you wanna get restaurant food at a discount. Or what you could also do, and what I probably suggest doing, is to just set aside some extra budget so that you can enjoy a few extra meals out with your friends at your favorite restaurants and say goodbye to your city and close out the chapter on a good note. And my final tip, which is probably the biggest one that a lot of people tend to overlook, is to just let yourself feel. Yeah, it can be really easy to get swept up in all of the busyness and the chaos of moving. And sometimes, because there's so much going on, you might not realize how you actually feel about this change. If there's one thing I've learned over the last few years, it's that change is always hard. Even if it's a good change, especially if it's a bad change, you're gonna struggle to adapt, and moving and taking yourself out of your routine, figuring out what your new life is gonna look like, navigating uncertainty, it's a lot of stress. So on the surface, you might seem calm and ready, but your subconscious actually looks like this. I mean, as much as I did not want to leave New York, I felt like once I had accepted that decision, I was totally fine. And it wasn't until we sold our first piece of furniture, it was this entryway storage unit last week, And I came back inside and saw that that area of our entryway was empty. And that's when I started feeling this anxiety and this sadness that I didn't even know I still had. So just take a breath, it's all gonna be okay. If you follow everything I said in this video, you're gonna be more than taken care of. And if you're interested in how our move is gonna go, I will be documenting it as we move from New York back home to San Francisco, and I enjoyed my last week in New York City. Make sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification so that you don't miss out on new videos. And I love you guys. I'll see you in the next one.